Back in my drinking days, I tried to commit suicide a couple of times.
Your chest hurts. There's a pain that hurts when you have these conversations. And
Country music has always worn its heart on a rhinestone sleeve, yet even the loneliest pedal steel solo can only hint at the silence that settles over a kitchen after a child is gone. Today we walk beside 19 legends who stepped into that silence and emerged forever changed. You will hear how sudden accidents, hidden battles, and barely born breaths rewired the artists behind Nashville's most familiar songs, and why grief may be the most exacting producer in any studio. Lean close, because behind every chart topper waits the moment time cracked, and every note you love carries an echo of a name whispered at a graveside. Before we begin, remember that these artists are not marble statues in the Country Music Hall of Fame. They are mothers and fathers who once stepped barefoot on Lego bricks, drove midnight carpools, and argued over curfews like the rest of us. Their stage lights dimmed. Their grief was lit by refrigerator bulbs and the glow of unanswered phones. George Jones once joked that fans only knew 3 things about him: the broken nose, the broken marriages, and the busted tour buses he left idling outside honky-tonks whenever he no-showed. Then, on a humid August night in 1999, a sedan drifted across the center line and ended the life of his 37-year-old daughter Susan. Nashville tabloids braced for public meltdown, yet the fireworks never came. Instead, Jones poured the whiskey down the sink, sat on the porch swing Susan once used as a child, and let the cicadas talk for him. When he finally returned to the studio, he cut choices, and every ragged syllable sounded like gravel scraping a headstone. 5 decades after his father died in the back seat of a Cadillac, Hank Williams Jr. faced his own roadside nightmare. 27-year-old Catherine was ejected when her SUV flipped along Highway 24 in 2020. Reporters camped outside Vanderbilt Hospital hoping for a quote, but the outlaw icon left through a side entrance, hat brim pulled so low, even the night shift nurse missed him. In the months that followed, he ignored interviews, grew a storm cloud beard, and let his Telecaster speak. Fans heard it on stage, a roar stretched to the breaking point, as if every note were trying to crawl back in time and grab the steering wheel. Ricky Skaggs once believed fiddles could fix anything. Then in 1992, his teenage stepson Andrew darted across a 2-lane road and never reached the other side. The driver's apology letter arrived with tear stains that were not Ricky's, and he left it unopened for years. On stage, he kept things bright, but off stage, he stared at the cracked finish on Andrew's guitar, convinced that certain chords should never ring again. Conway Twitty was luckier. His daughter Kathy survived a brutal 1970s collision. Still, the sight of her in traction rewired him. He slashed tour dates, poured syrupy tenderness into later ballads, and told bandmates, "Gold records can't hug you back." But that was only the first verse of this sad song. Loretta Lynn's childhood in Butcher Hollow taught her that rivers feed corn, coal, and melody, yet in 1984, the Duck River offered only heartbreak. Her son, Jack Benny, tried to ride his horse across a swollen stretch and vanished beneath the foam. Search crews found him downstream at dawn, hat still on, guitar pick in his pocket. Loretta retreated to her tour bus for weeks, curtains drawn, convinced the world no longer deserved her voice. When she returned with the album Wouldn't It Be Great, every lyric sounded like a mother calling across water that refused to answer. Craig Morgan, an Army veteran accustomed to delivering bad news to strangers, never imagined dredging a lake for his own child. 19-year-old Jerry disappeared under Kentucky Lake in 2016, his life jacket bobbing like a cruel joke. Craig stood on the pier all night, fingers pressed to the wood as if feeling for a pulse beneath the waves. Days later he wrote, "The Father, My Son, and the Holy Ghost," a song that climbs from a whisper to a howl, mirroring the way panic turns into stubborn hope. Alan Jackson's family seemed untouchable until 2018, when his son-in-law Ben Seligman slipped on a Florida boat dock, struck his head, and never woke. Alan kept the tragedy private, yet fans noticed subtle changes. The brim of his cowboy hat tipped lower, The pauses between verses grew longer, and his signature easy grin looked more like an apology to the future. Morgan's grief did not stop at the water's edge. He and his wife Karen set an extra place at every holiday dinner, a silent invitation Jerry never accepts, but also never declines. In interviews, Craig admits he still drives to the lake at dawn, cup of coffee in hand, just to listen for his son's laugh skipping across the surface like a stone. Fans who visit the spot often leave guitar picks with handwritten prayers, turning the pier into a quiet shrine. The Jackson family, meanwhile, rallied behind Alan's daughter Maddie, whose book on healing turned her father into a reluctant advocate for grief counseling. He donated concert proceeds to trauma centers, saying from the stage, "We can't rewrite the past, but we can help someone else survive theirs." But that wasn't the whole story. Because grief can drown quietly in still water, waiting for the next breath to pull you under. Some storms blow in from the outside, others build behind closed eyes. Willie Nelson spent Christmas 1991 staring at an acoustic guitar he suddenly hated. His son Billy had ended his own life hours earlier, choosing a rope over rehab. Reporters begged Willie for comment, but he simply strummed 3 slow chords, letting the vibration speak. He has rarely talked about that night, yet every gentle tremolo since feels like a father rocking an empty cradle. Eddie Arnold carried the same invisible weight after his only boy Richard died by suicide in 1963. Arnold hosted the Grand Ole Opry with impeccable manners, but backstage he polished his boots in absolute silence as if noise itself were an offense to memory. Friends recall him tightening guitar strings until they snapped, insisting the pain had to go somewhere. Glenn Campbell's tragedy arrived in 2 stages. First, a son-in-law's self-inflicted death sent tremors through the family. Years later, Alzheimer's eroded Glenn's own mind, yet caregivers noticed he never forgot the young man's name. He would pause mid-song, stare at the rafters, and mouth a prayer only he could hear. Tammy Wynette endured a different torment. Her daughter Tina's life-threatening health problems. Every hospital beep tightened itself around Tammy's heart, and the constant fear of a midnight phone call stole sleep for decades. She poured that insomnia into performances, her voice cracking on notes it once sailed over, proof that even a living child can haunt you when tomorrow isn't promised. Mental health stigma runs deep in rural America, and these stars found themselves fighting 2 battles at once, the tragedy itself and the whisper campaign that always follows. Willie, for instance, received letters from strangers blaming fame, divorce, even marijuana for Billy's death, each envelope reopening the wound. Tammy Wynette heard church friends suggest that constant touring had invited divine punishment. Such comments drove the singers deeper into music, where judgment turns into reverb and pain finds acceptable volume. If you ever wondered why their ballads feel simultaneously defiant and defeated, now you know. Heartbreak can strike before the first lullaby. Johnny Cash already wore black for the broken, yet nothing prepared him for the moment June Carter whispered that the baby was gone. He stared at the ceiling of Baptist Hospital, counting cracks like prison bars, and when the pills came calling later that night, he did not say no. Decades of sobriety began with the acceptance that some cradles stay empty, no matter how many hymns you write. Tracy Lawrence and his first wife Becca suffered a miscarriage in the middle of a relentless tour schedule. Tracy stepped off stage to accept condolences from strangers, then climbed back up and pretended the smoke machines were clouds instead of camouflage for tears. Months later, the marriage unraveled, each partner convinced the other had healed faster, though neither had healed at all. Miscarriage also marked the life of Keith Whitley's widow, Lori Morgan. Their son, Jesse, grew up battling his father's shadow and his own addictions. But Lori quietly mourned the child who never drew breath, the sibling Jesse never met. Years later, she whispered to a journalist, "The empty chair at my table is smaller than the rest, but it's still there." Losses like these rarely make headlines, yet they shape melodies just the same. A missing heartbeat can be heard in the extra beat of a measure, the the slight hesitation before a chorus you didn't notice until now, and what happened next would surprise even seasoned listeners. Not every story ends in a funeral, yet near misses leave scars that bleed into music. Merle Haggard's son Marty survived a head-on collision that left the car mangled like crumpled sheet metal. Merle visited the wreckage in the impound lot, ran his fingers over twisted chrome and muttered, "This is a steel guitar turned inside out." The next record he cut dripped with minor keys, proof that relief and dread can occupy the same chord. Charlie Daniels once roared through life with a fiddle bow like lightning, but when his only son nearly died in a motorcycle crash, the lightning flickered. During the long hospital nights, Charlie signed every autograph request handed to nurses, adding the phrase, "Tell the ones you love today." He later admitted the words were aimed at himself as much as the fans. John Denver's adopted son, Zachary, narrowly escaped a boating disaster off the California coast. Denver was touring when the call came, and he spent the flight home scribbling frantic verses on an airsick bag. Parts of those scribbles became Calypso, a joyful ode to oceans that nevertheless carries an undertow of fear if you listen closely. These brushes with death served as dress rehearsals for grief, teaching artists that tomorrow is, at best, a polite invitation, never a guarantee. But survival does not close the chapter. It only flips the page to darker revelations. Out of the ashes, some parents forged hymns that moved entire arenas to tears. Vince Gill walked out of a Tennessee hospital carrying a cardboard box filled with his half-brother Bob's belongings. Inside lay a crumpled photograph from childhood, a pocket knife, and a program from Alcoholics Anonymous. That night, Vince strummed aimless chords until one progression made him sit upright. Within hours, "Go Rest High on That Mountain" existed, born whole as if Bob had whispered it through the strings. The song would become a modern spiritual, sung at funerals from small-town churches to the Capitol Rotunda. Reba McEntire faced a loss that technically wasn't blood, but family is larger than biology. In 1991, a charter plane carrying her band and tour manager slammed into Otay Mountain, killing all on board. Reba called them her musical children, and the crash felt like losing multiple generations at once. She climbed the slope the next dawn, gathering ripped set lists and a single scorched piece of stage lighting. Back in the studio, she recorded "For My Broken Heart," an album that debuted at #1 and still sounds like a candlelit vigil pressed onto vinyl. Craig Morgan resurfaced here, channeling the Kentucky Lake Nightmare into a song that begins in a whisper so soft you lean forward, then rises like a father screaming at heaven. When he debuted it on national television, even the camera operators forgot to zoom, frozen by raw truth. Country radio programmers, famous for trimming tracks deemed too sad, played the full 5 minutes without edits. Pain, when honest, can silence the stopwatch. These anthems prove that grief, though unwelcome, can carve open a pathway straight to the human heart, turning private mourning into communal release. But the final chorus still waits, carrying every voice we've met tonight toward a single, aching note. Grief does not confine itself to the parents who feel the first shock. It ripples outward, shaping siblings, bandmates, and even strangers singing along in their cars. Few stories prove this more than Keith Whitley's family. When Keith died in 1989, his boy Jesse Keith was just too young to remember anything beyond the scent of aftershave on a stage jacket. Years later, grappling with a famous last name and a father he knew only through vinyl, Jesse spiraled into addiction, much like the man whose legacy he carried. Every tabloid headline about the son seemed to mock the father's own unfinished ballads, a tragic echo chamber that left Keith's widow Lori Morgan fighting on two fronts, honoring a legend while rescuing their child from the same dark gravity. Standing on a benefit concert stage in 2008, she addressed the crowd without accompaniment. "I would trade every platinum plaque hanging in my hallway for one ordinary Sunday dinner with both of them." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Charlie Daniels Jr. offers another portrait of life lived in the wake of almost loss. Surviving the motorcycle crash left him with lingering pain that sometimes spiked during his father's concerts. He would watch from the wings, clutching his ribs each time the fiddle solo peaked, a reminder that breath itself was now a gift. Charlie Sr. started a charity auctioning signed bows, funneling the proceeds to trauma wards, insisting the debt for his son's life would never be fully paid. Even distant observers feel the pull. After Craig Morgan performed his tribute on live television, message boards filled with thousands of parents typing through tears. Some admitted they had never heard of Craig before, yet the song unlocked memories they had boxed away. In that moment, the boundary between star and stranger dissolved, proving that country music's community is stitched together less by geography than by shared wounds. John Denver's brush with disaster birthed a quieter ripple. He launched a coastal conservation foundation, arguing that safer seas begin with people who respect their power. At dedication ceremonies, he rarely mentioned Zachary by name, but every speech circled back to the fragility of the tide and the privilege of returning home. It turned out environmentalism and fatherhood played the same chord in his heart. Protect what cannot protect itself. These second-generation stories remind us that the song is never over when the radio clicks off. Loss keeps writing verses in the lives that follow, changing decisions, steering causes, and sometimes saving someone else's child before tragedy repeats. But even this domino effect leads us toward the final refrain, where memory and melody become indistinguishable. What then remains after the amps cool and the arena empties? For these 19 artists, the answer is both everything and nothing. Everything, because a parent never stops hearing the laughter that used to fill a hallway. Nothing, because no encore, award, or streaming milestone can barter for the touch of a hand that is gone. Yet they keep singing. Microphones capture voices that now quiver on certain vowels. Engineers notice sessions wrap earlier because midnight sounds too much like an ICU hallway, and fans lean closer without knowing why. Listen again to your favorite ballad, and you may hear the faint rhythm of a heart that beat only a few years, or a sigh from a child who never saw the stage lights. Country music is often dismissed as 3 chords and the truth, but the truth is heavier than any chord. It weighs as much as a casket small enough to carry in one arm, as much as a diary filled with appointments a teenager will never keep. Every time these singers step behind a microphone, they drag that weight with them. And every time we press play, we lift a corner. So the next time a song gives you goosebumps, remember the unseen co-writer, grief. Remember George on his porch swing, Loretta calling across the river, Willie stroking a silent guitar, Reba clutching burnt paper in mountain fog. Their pain has been melted down and recast as melody so the rest of us can feel less alone. Maybe that is the quiet bargain between artist and audience. We borrow their sorrow for 3 minutes. They borrow our ears forever. The melody fades, the lights dim, but the echo lingers. Soft, insistent, eternal, just like the love that outlives every goodbye. This story never truly ends.